So I'm sure you've noticed that there is no standard or right time to turn on your exterior Christmas lights. This year I saw Christmas lights on November 1st. There were still like the leftovers of Halloween littering the streets. And yet I saw a couple houses in this city with the trappings of Christmas already well on display. Now I suspect that each of you has a preference to, if you hang lights at all, when those lights go on. Some of you probably feel that it's best to do it incredibly early. Perhaps you were one of those November 1st people that I'm mentioning. Some of you maybe don't do it till mid-December. Some of you wait until December 1st. Some of you are happy to do it any time as long as it's after Remembrance Day. Respect for the veterans. Some of you barely do it at all because you don't want to pay for the electricity. Or because you don't want to be accused of being one of those people who likes Christmas. I think there's a couple of those out there too. But I do admit, when I see the early Christmas light turner honors, I'm usually curious about what has caused that person or that household to turn their lights on so early. Like, it could be a reason as simple as they are just super duper excited about the Christmas season and what's coming. Maybe grandma and grandpa or a family friend or aunts or uncles maybe visited, and so Christmas was celebrated early, and so they got everything ready. But for some, I think they just need to do something to create a safe distraction from the reality of life. Professor and author Scott McKnight says this. He says, to deal with the problems to which there is a possible solution can be a way of avoiding the problems to which, humanly speaking, there is no solution. To deal with the problems to which there is a possible solution can be a way of avoiding the problems to which, humanly speaking, there is no solution. In other words, sometimes we keep ourselves very busy so that we can stay very distracted and feel like we actually are on top of things in a world that often leaves us feeling very much the opposite. So it could be that a person hangs their Christmas lights and turns them on because the rest of life is so out of control that for a moment it gives them something to do that A, needs doing, B, brings a pinch of joy, but C, also potentially helps them avoid reality. And so I really do, when I see the early Christmas lights go on, I ask, I wonder what's going on in that person's heart, that they needed that. Perhaps our Christmas lights are a confession. Maybe all the lights shining on all the streets every Christmas are actually a confession that we know the world hurts and things are not perfect. And these lights that we've all turned on are the safest way to avoid thinking too long about the way things really are. The way I really am. The way my family really is. What's going on in my life. What's going on in the world around me. Even Chris Martin, the melodic mastermind from the band Coldplay, in their Christmas song, comments on this. And he says, those Christmas lights light up the street, down where the sea and city meet. May all your troubles soon be gone. Oh, Christmas lights keep shining on. Seems culture looks to Christmas lights to remember that there's something to anticipate. We look to Christmas lights to remember that joy is on the horizon and love might be felt. And finally, for our theme for today, peace. Maybe the lights remind us that for a season, I can feel some peace if I just distract myself from real life for a while. It's Christmas after all. Sadly, as we all know, this doesn't work very long, and it doesn't work very well. As the peace found in the Christmas season, the peace of family, memories, warm fires, rest and play, food and friends, time off from work, they all soon disappear, and with it, the peace of Christmas. So the Bible, as you know, has a lot to say about peace. The Old Testament uses the word shalom, or the idea of shalom, over 200 times. The New Testament uses the Greek word for peace, which is eirene, over 90 times. Peace is a major theme in the Bible. Off the top of my head, I can probably give you 3 or 4 right now different roles that peace plays in our world. And perhaps because of this, because the Bible is so clear on peace, because it's such a foundational aspect of the Christian faith, when we take that and put it in contrast with the way that the world is, maybe the pagan and the secular world have understandable suspicion about the Christian faith. It says a lot about peace. Where's that? You see, hope's understandable. We can feel hopeful about things. Joy, well, that can be noticed pretty well every day if you look hard enough for it. Love, most people have loved and been loved. We get that a little bit. But peace, personally and collectively, at times seems a lot harder to find, and even if it's found, sustain it for very long. Most of us don't get to lunch before peace is disrupted. You pick your generation, something was happening in that period of time to suggest peace was at best a wish or a prayer. And each generation then has had those voices who've considered peace and championed peace and tried to figure out how to bring peace. The Old Testament authors, philosophers, scientists, psychologists, pop stars have all commented on peace or the absence of it and what we need to do about it. Prominent atheist Richard Dawkins characterized God as anything but peaceful when he wrote this of him. This is going to be really hard for me to read. These are big words. Arguably the most unpleasant character in all of fiction, he starts. A vindictive, bloodthirsty, ethnic cleanser. A misogynistic, homophobic, racist, infanticidal, genocidal, filicidal, pestilential, megalomaniacal, sadomasochist, capriciously malevolent bully. Yeah, we get it, Richard. You're very smart. It's the first thing I want to say. That comes out of his book, The God Delusion. That is his characterization of Yahweh. As harsh as this is, and as absolutely wrong as he is, when one has experienced so little peace, and it sure sounds like that's his story, blaming God is the best solution to somehow bring peace into our lives, because at least we can eliminate that possibility. Peace, I think, like the other Advent themes, tells us very clearly that the world is desperate for more of it. We still want more peace. Those who don't know Jesus as Lord are writing things like this, which I think is a fairly clear confession that peace is absent. But even for those of us who do know Jesus as Lord, we want more peace. Which places us right in the thick of the Advent season, right in the thick of the Advent mood. The weary world wants more. So today we're going to consider what peace is and why we can and should want more of it. So we're going to start in the Old Testament, then move to the New Testament, and then we're going to look at the future. Beginning in the Old Testament, peace is God's promised accomplishment, not ours. Peace is God's promised accomplishment, not ours. Many of you will know this passage, Isaiah 9, 6 and 7. For to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government will be on his shoulders, and he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Of the greatness of his government and peace, there will be no end. So before we talk about these promises that are part of the character of the Messiah, let's give you a little context for why Isaiah is saying this and who he's saying this to. So Isaiah 9 is one of the most exciting messianic prophecies in the Old Testament. It may be the most exciting messianic prophecy. But remember that this prophecy was given to people walking in darkness. If you go back to the beginning of Isaiah 9, it's a very gloomy scene. Very dark, very heavy. And it's spoken to people that were in desperate need of hope and joy and love and peace. But to those people walking in a land of darkness, stumbling and tripping, God spoke of a promise to come. And the promise wasn't just that peace would come like a Christmas drop, like an aid drop out of a helicopter. Here's peace. There you go. Peace is on the earth now. It was going to come by way of a victory, which is the language of Isaiah, that a victory was coming. If you go one verse back into verse 5, you'll see Isaiah talking about all of the basically the excess of war being burnt up because there's been a victory taking place. And so God's people would enjoy the fruits of what God has accomplished. Fruits of a victory that they did not win, that they did not earn, and that they did not deserve. They didn't come up with it. They didn't rationalize their way there. And once Isaiah explains that there's this victory coming, then he explains who would bring it. And that's where we begin in verse 6. And what the prophet says is that it will come by way of a child born and a son given. So again, we learn that the victory, the result, the peace that's promised rests not on people, but on the child who would be born, the son who would be given. It would be God's accomplishment and it's God's idea. Further pointing to the fact is Isaiah's list of benefits that come by way of the name or the character of the king born. So all of them are good and all would deserve our attention, but we're talking about peace, so our focus is going to be Prince of Peace. So the word translated there, and again, I'm sure many of you know this, is the Hebrew word shalom, which is much more than tranquility or absence of conflict. It speaks to the wholeness in all of one's life. And then we get this other word, prince, in there. So we have shalom, but we also have prince, which is speaking to the administration of that wholeness in the world and in the lives of people. And then finally, and I didn't include this on the slide, but at the end of verse 7, it says that it's the zeal of the Lord that will accomplish this, which is to say that it's not people or policies or procedures, but God's zeal, which is his passionate and loving commitment to his people. So what we have is the promise of peace would come because of God's Messiah's victory and the Messiah's birth and his administration of peace and the zeal of the Lord causing it all to come our way. Peace is not a vision or creation of the hippies. It's not a vision or a creation of activists and politicians and professors and religious leaders and philosophers and warriors or rulers. Peace is God's idea. It's God's promise. It's God's responsibility. And it's actually God's passionate commitment to you that he would bring peace. Isaiah never ever said, hey Israel, hey Judah, hey gang, figure out how to bring yourself some peace because you guys are out of control. God's rooting for you. He really wants you to know peace, so get working at it. What God said through the prophet is that your attempts at peace are horrible. And they've left you stumbling in the dark. And so God is going to bring you his peace. He is going to accomplish peace for you because you're so bad at it yourself. And he's going to be the one that brings wholeness to you and repairs your relationship first with him and then all of creation. So you can enjoy harmony with others and the world around you, and even yourself. Now, continuing then into the New Testament, and this is really just a side B at this point, but we find that peace was realized in a person then, not a plan. Luke chapter 1 and chapter 2. Beginning in verse 76 of 1, we read, "And you, my child, will be called a prophet of the Most High, This is Zechariah, the father of John the Baptist, talking. For you will go on before the Lord to prepare the way for him, to give his people the knowledge of salvation through the forgiveness of their sins, because of the tender mercy of our God, by which the rising sun will come to us from heaven, to shine on those living in darkness and in the shadow of death, to guide our feet into the path of peace. And then Luke 2, this is on all of our Christmas cards. Glory to God in the highest, and on earth peace among those with whom he is pleased. Other translations would say, upon whom his favor rests. So these two verses affirm that ultimate peace is not something that can be manufactured in a human plan. True and lasting peace comes to the world only through Jesus Christ. Only through the person of Jesus of Nazareth. And the reason that it can only come through Jesus and not through you or me is because peace isn't simply just freedom from trouble. Peace isn't simply having more good days at work. As I've said, peace in a biblical sense, and I think it was William Barclay who gave it this definition, but says that it's whatever contributes to a person's highest good. That's peace. And so peace is about healing, it's about wholeness, it's about flourishing. And no program or policy can ever come close to being able to make a person truly whole, because only one person can atone for the biggest disruption to peace in our lives, which is sin and estrangement from God. Only Jesus can do that. Luke chapter 1, we read that after a season of wordlessness, you may remember that John the Baptist, who was wrestling with his faith, goes mute, he goes silent, can't speak for the season of his wife's pregnancy. And then John the Baptist is born, and God loosens his tongue again. And he begins to speak, but actually he begins to sing. And his song announces that because of God's mercy through the Messiah, salvation and peace were coming to those living in darkness. Not coming to those who are doing pretty good already, to those who are living in darkness. And not because of a platform or a philosophy or a peace program, but because the Messiah would lead his people into the path of peace. In Luke 2, the angels announced to the shepherds that the Savior was born, and through him peace is available to those upon whom his favor rests, or who he's pleased with. And the angels are ultimately announcing that this estrangement between humanity and God now has an answer. Now has an answer. And the answer is born this very day in the city of David. You better go see it. And what these two passages hold in common is that peace was no longer just a prophecy. It was realized in Jesus Christ. It wasn't a personal plan to peace. It was realized in the person that is God's Son. People couldn't solve their peace problem, and they can't today either. Yet we sure do try. 1795, German philosopher Immanuel Kant had a paper published. I find the title funny. Perpetual Peace. 1795, Perpetual Peace. This paper was published at a time when Europe was grappling with the aftershocks of the French Revolution and the Napoleonic Wars. Things had been not very peaceful, like every other generation. And Kant's Perpetual Peace draws then on these Enlightenment principles, which were so popular then, emphasizing reason as the key tool for resolving global chaos and conflict and restoring harmony. We just need to do some good thinking, because nobody tried that yet. Perpetual peace was something that Kant actually believed could be achieved if humans thought really good about it. You know what's crazy is people still look to this document for like global relationships and how to do governance and trade and stuff like that. Like it's still like in circulation as a reasonably helpful tool. And so I can't fault Kant for the desire for perpetual peace, but what a waste of time. It hasn't accomplished anything. And yet we still, in our own ways, are making the same mistake. We too have attempted to create our personal plans to perpetual peace. And Jesus may be part of it, but he's often just one point. I think Kant had about 5. Jesus is like one of many. And so, yeah, we get Jesus in there, but we also have financial stability and good education and healthy bodies. And we want to have lots of sex and with lots of people and in whatever way we want it. That will bring peace. And also we could probably just take lots of vacation and have super good days at work most of the time. And we'll read pop psychology self-help books. And then we'll try to rise up to have power and control and influence so that we can leave legacy. And I think that we really do believe if we had all of those things, life might be a bit more peaceful. We've all written this plan to perpetual peace at some time in our life. And today I just have to believe that there are people here this morning that aren't feeling that peaceful. I read a great story about Eugene Peterson this week, a great author. I think the pastor's pastor in a lot of ways. And it said something like this is a paraphrase, but he said that whenever he preaches, he would stand in front of his congregation and prayerfully look out at them and say, "What's going on?" And then he says, because I know them, some of them I know pretty well, but I don't really know what they're like. And I have to suspect that there's somebody here, or somebody's, or many of us, if not all of us, that your path to perpetual peace is probably letting you down. And so maybe you need to be reminded today that Jesus has come to bring you peace. And specifically, how did he say he would bring it? Not as the world gives. And so what's our plans to perpetual peace rooted in? Pretty much everything the world offers. Jesus actually says it won't come that way. It's not going to come to you that way. And how many people have to write papers that don't work until we believe it? Your doctor, your prime minister, and your pastor can't bring you peace. I can point you to him all day long, but I can't actually do it for you. I cannot win you peace. It's only found in Jesus. Peace comes to us by the way of God, or it does not come at all. Probably you've heard the old expression, no God, no peace, K-N-O-W, no, and then no God, no peace. I mean, it's a little goofy, but it's true. Because peace is a person, not a plan. Now, I know that sometimes peace feels like it's not actually a possibility. Which brings us again right into the thick of Advent. Because we're still living in a broken world. And though we have personal peace through Jesus, there is still a peace to come that remains our promise. That we haven't seen, we haven't tasted, we haven't experienced yet. And so the end of the Bible, which looks to our future, tells us that peace is still the promise. And it's actually good and okay to still be wanting more, because there's more to come. Revelation 21, 1-4. I probably could have just said Revelation 21, the entire chapter, but we'll look at 1-4. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and there was no longer any sea. I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride, beautifully dressed for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, "Look, God's dwelling place is now among the people, and he will dwell with them. They will be his people. And God himself will be with them and be their God. He will wipe every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death or mourning or crying or pain, for the old order of things has passed away." Chantel and I were blessed to have all of our grandmothers live well into our adult years. They were all at our wedding. They all have met our children. 2 of them have now gone home to be with Jesus, and 2 of them are still living. Chantel had a grandma who was one of the ones who's passed away. Her name was Irene. And Irene, the name Irene, comes directly from the Greek word for peace, which is Irene. And if you look at that word, it actually is just Irene with an E on the front of it. As I said, it occurs 92 times in the New Testament, this word or this idea. Peace in the Greek was often used as a verbal greeting. They do it in speech or in letters. So you'll see Paul write, peace often. And the word generally follows the same meaning and the same usage as the Hebrew word shalom. And so Chantel's grandma was literally called Peace. That was her name, Peace. Sadly, it proved to be a rather ironic name. I'll spare you the specific details of her story, but Chantel's grandma's life included childhood trauma. It included some very real mental health struggles that I don't think were ever explored. She lost her husband to Parkinson's at far too young of an age, and nearly 30 years before her own passing. She never married again. And she lived long enough to see most of her friends and most of her siblings die. And she lived most of her life with a lot of anxiety and fear. There's one thing I remember about her was just a perpetual nervousness. And yet she was a wonderful lady, and Chantel would tell you she's got great memories of time spent with her as a kid, and being at her house. I had many great conversations with her, enjoyed talking to her. But Irene's life did not do her name justice. Though she was called Peace, peace was often hard to come by for her. And I think that really is the story in so many ways of the place in between the Christ who has come and the Christ who is coming. Peace has been spoken, but often it doesn't feel very true. Peace was promised in Jesus. Peace came with Jesus. It was accomplished through Jesus. And today Jesus remains the eternal administrator of peace. Today there is a way to be made whole, justified and sanctified. We just talked about it in our catechism. There is a path to walk on in which peace with God and with others actually is possible. And yet there's not a person on the planet who has not observed with their own eyes or known in their own experience the absence of peace. We've all called things peace. We've all named things peace that aren't powerful enough to be our peace. We've all wondered where the administration of peace is. For the last 2 years, the top headline has been war, Russia and Ukraine. And now we've got, of course, Palestine and Israel. Before that, it was the global pandemic. Remember, for months when the top headline every day was how many people died? And the death toll for today. I remember one comedian talking about it was like getting the lottery numbers every day. We all sit there and wait for the death toll to roll in. And then it'd go down and we'd celebrate. And so what are we left to conclude? Either peace is a myth, peace is misunderstood, or the fullness of God's kingdom of peace is still on the way. And so for me and for you, I hope we can conclude that peace is not a myth. It is an accomplishment of God. It's not an accomplishment of us. But sometimes peace is misunderstood. I do think we should believe that. And I do think we absolutely should believe that there is still more peace to come when Jesus returns. And that's the promise of Revelation 21. So John tells us some great things about the peace that is to come. He tells us that he sees a new heaven and a new earth. And please catch this. What John saw is a new kind of heaven and a new kind of earth. Not just another heaven and earth. It's a new one. John is describing a complete transformation of all things. But he uses the language of heaven and earth because that's all he has. How can he possibly, with the vocabulary he had, describe God's perfect coming kingdom? He couldn't, and so he uses the language that we have, a new heaven and a new earth. But this is something different. And what John sees is a vibrant differentiation between the world that was and the heaven that was and the world that will be and the heaven that will be. So John's not describing a fresh version of the same thing. He's actually talking about something totally different. And so what's different? What are some of the highlights? Well, that there's no chaos, that there's this perfect, tangible presence of God, and pain and sorrow are eliminated. So we know that there will be no chaos because John says, his little verse, like again, you don't see this one on many Christmas cards, but it just says, there will be no more sea. You see, the sea was a symbol of unpredictability. It was a symbol of chaos. It was a symbol of evil. Earlier in Revelation, you see that the beast actually comes out of the sea. Even while John is stuck on the island of Patmos writing this letter, he's staring at the sea that separates him from Ephesus, which is where his church and his family is. And he's longing to be with them, and in between them is the sea. The sea was this thing that is completely absent of peace. But John says in the newness of the kingdom that is coming, the sea will be no more. Because there won't be danger, and there won't be unpredictability, and there won't be chaos. And then he continues with this peace description in verse 3. We read that God's dwelling place is now with people. Look, a loud voice says, God's dwelling place is with his people. And you know, God's presence has been with his people before. We see it in the tabernacle in the Old Testament. God's presence would fill it. But then it would go away again. And then we see the presence of God again in the person of Jesus Christ, who becomes the new tabernacle. And so wherever Jesus is, the presence of God is there fully. But this is a new heaven and a new earth, and what we find is a loud voice exclaiming, look, God's dwelling place is with people forever. Not come and go, not in the person of Jesus where the kingdom has come, it's been inaugurated, but the kingdom of the world still operates. But God's dwelling place is with us fully, with no other kingdom present, and it never leaves. Sustained presence of God. We won't go, oh, I think, man, the presence of God is in here. We'll know it all the time. And what peace will that be? When the administrator of peace is just so tangibly with us. And then finally, John describes some of the results of that presence of God. And again, we find peace. And John says that every tear is wiped from their eye. Every tear. Now, we know that tears can come for reasons other than sadness. But what seems to be in John's mind here is the tears of sadness, mourning, and grief. And they'll be wiped from the eyes of God's people. And we know that they'll be wiped away because we see that one of the reasons that people cry is dealt with. Not being we cry because people we love die. Because death makes us really, really sad. Even when we know where our loved ones are, and we know that we'll see them again, the separation of loved ones through death is an agony that can't be compared to anything else. But in this final state of God's kingdom, sorrow will be gone because there's no more death. And as a result, no more people are found mourning with hearts broken and lives shattered and questions unanswered. Then we find that there'll be no pain. No physical pain. You know, for those of us who've never experienced the exhaustion and disruption of physical pain, unrelenting pain, we maybe don't appreciate that promise. For those of you that have dealt with that, you do know what that promise might mean. But I also say to this room that is, still a relatively speaking young group, we probably will all know significant pain before our time comes. We're probably all going to face it. And so what a promise to hear that the chaos, the exhaustion, the anxiety, the disruption of physical pain will be abolished. What a promise of peace. And so, church, we are waiting for the day when Jesus returns. And with his arrival comes the elimination of cruel surprises and sadness and sorrow and grief and pain of any possible kind. That's what we are longing for. I mean, we could try to convince each other that we're not, but I'm not going to believe you. Yes, we are. And so we anticipate. We are a people anticipating greater peace still to come. That is what we are. And we are doing it with confident expectation, hope, that peace is on the way. And so what do we say about all this? We say simply this, that God decided a long time ago to send Jesus as our Prince of Peace, as our administrator of peace. And Jesus has come. And he's made peace with God for us. And he's actually made it possible for us to find peace with one another. As Paul says to the Ephesians, he has become our peace. And he's talking specifically about Jews and Gentiles learning how to get along as a new humanity called the church. And so today you can know peace. You really can know peace. And take the Holy Spirit out of your life and you'll find out quickly just how much peace you forfeit. But we also confess that the world is not yet peaceful. And we feel the chaos and pain often. But the promise is coming. Jesus says, I am coming soon. And when he comes, what Jesus does is he judges the earth. He judges the living and the dead. And there's been way too many fire and brimstone preachers that have done a poor job of the word judgment. But you've heard me say it, and I say it again, we want Jesus to judge the earth. We want his righteous judgment. I desperately want Jesus to come and make things right. I really do. Because he'll judge it in righteousness. And he'll set it correct. We need that. We want that. And once he has judged the earth, the living and the dead, his peace will never end. Fully sustained peace. It'll be our reality. And so today, might this group of Christians gathered on this Sunday morning, early December, Yellowknife, Canada, gathered together, all longing for more peace. Find unity in the confession. God, we still want more. We need more peace. Come, Lord Jesus.